Good afternoon. My name is Fredrick Malmstrom at the Denver Marriott Tech Center for the Rocky Mountain Psychological Association meeting on the 14th of April 2018. Okay, I'd like to present this paper, introduce my colleagues, Jim Oraker, who is retired emeritus from the University of the Rockies, and Jason McGregor, who is presently on the faculty at Baylor University. Neither of them could be here, but I'd like to give them and you extended greetings. Okay, the paper we are presenting today has a little bit wordy title. It's called Are Moral Rehabilitation Programs Effective? And in particular, what I want to show you is a presentation of the data we have collected on the U.S. Air Force Academy's Honor Rehabilitation Program. I got very interested in these rehabilitation programs because some years ago when I was a prison psychologist after I retired from the Air Force, they made me in charge of, at the Chillicothe prison in Ohio, of the Sexual Offender Rehabilitation Program. And I told them I had no experience whatever in sex. It was not my topic, but they said, you know, you will do this because the governor has decreed it. And unfortunately for these rehab programs, most of them have never been validated. In particular, the sexual offender rehabilitation programs. There have been several articles written on this from the New York Times, and one of them is that all you have is testimonial evidence that it works, sometimes called proof by authority. In other words, they said do something, so we did something. We evaluated this or we did not evaluate the program, but we set it up and we gave it, and the state government, of course, bought off on it. We didn't really know what we were doing, but we never got any feedback whether sex offenders were actually rehabilitated or not. That's not the only program that has never been truly evaluated, such as Alcoholics Anonymous. There are judges assign people to anger management programs who've been in domestic violence, and it just goes on forever. You know that these I guess what you call is remediation programs have ever been validated, and what we really need are good data to determine whether that happens or not. I happen to be familiar with the Air Force Academy's rehabilitation program for those who have committed honor violations because that is what the government bought off on, and that's what they've been doing for the last 10 or 15 years with the rehabilitation. The reason I got into this was because I had gotten very interested way back early after I graduated from the Air Force Academy in '64 on whether these rehab programs or whether the honor program was actually working or not. And all I can say is, give you a spoiler alert here, is that these systems have simply not been proven by good, hard, solid data. Most of them are done by surveys afterwards. Well, anyway, so what I want to tell you is by proof by authority, what I call here. One I want to read to you, cut to this slide here. This is a class advisory senate presentation given by the Commandant of Cadets at that time. That was General Lengyel, who was Commandant of Cadets in 2012. Had this one statement. He said, General Lengyel was very impressed with our honor code. He feels that probation is an outstanding aspect of our code. The probation experience has proven over and over again to be an extremely effective rehabilitation program. Well, this is something that I would like to examine in greater detail on whether it really is very effective on getting people to be honest and deal with the honor system. Now, if you are not familiar, take a look at this slide. If you go into the north entrance of the academy, right there on one of the billboards they have electronically said the mission of the U.S. Air Force Academy. I'm more familiar with the Air Force Academy than I am with West Point or Annapolis, but their honor codes are very similar. And it says the mission of the U.S. Air Force Academy is to educate, train, and inspire men and women to become officers of character. The very first thing, officers of character, motivated to lead the United States Air Force in service to our nation. Nowhere does it say there the mission of the Air Force Academy is to train pilots, is to train technicians, navigators, or missileers, anything like this, or people who will, charge the enemy, machine gun emplacements. It says to train officers of character. So if that's why you have that multi-billion-dollar institution up there, which trains 1,000 second lieutenants every year to go out into the Air Force, do they really train officers of character, or is their mission to supply airline pilots? I'm not sure. But anyway, take a look at this. Okay, every cadet, when they finish basic training, takes a sworn honor oath of the honor code, and it says this, quote, "We will not lie, cheat, or steal, or cheat, nor tolerate among us anyone who does." And says, furthermore, get that furthermore, "I resolve to do my duty and live honorably, so help me God." Okay, the honor code, okay, this is what the cadets swear to, take a solemn oath, and the services take the oath very seriously. Furthermore, I will say that this code is written backwards. I say it's written backwards because what it should say is lead up on top, "I resolve to do my duty and to live honorably, and furthermore, we will not lie, steal, or cheat, nor tolerate among us anyone who does," because the lying, cheating, stealing, and toleration is a subset of living honorably. What this gets down to is that every officer and cadet that comes into the Air Force, or the Navy, or the Army for that matter, takes an oath that they will engage in behavior which is fitting of an officer and a gentleman. In other words, that they are not, let's see, I believe it's Article 134 in the Unified Code of Military Justice that says conduct unbecoming that of an officer and a gentleman will lay you open to, punishment like court-martial charges, or Article 15s too. Now, subsumed under this, to live honorably, are things that are not covered by lying, cheating, stealing, and tolerating, such as sexual assault, such as rape, such as cheating at cards, public drunkenness and intoxication, defamation of other officers. In other words, there's a whole subset of behaviors which are officers that are not supposed to engage in, other than just lying, cheating, stealing, or tolerating others who have lied, cheated, and stole. Okay. Now, the honor codes, these are the cadet and midshipman honor codes. This is the U.S. Air Force Academy honor code, which says, a cadet, "We will not lie, steal, or cheat, nor tolerate among us anyone who does." West Point is very similar because the Air Force Academy, back in 1955 when it was founded, used the exact same honor code as West Point. In fact, the Air Force Academy was originally modeled after West Point, and they've, of course, evolved and changed considerably since then. But it says, "A cadet will not lie, cheat, steal, or tolerate those who do." At the Naval Academy, it says, "Midshipmen are persons of integrity. They do not lie, cheat, or steal." It does not say in that honor code that they will not tolerate among us those who also lie, cheat, and steal, but that is placed under not the honor code, it's placed under the disciplinary code, and any cadet or midshipman can be dismissed from the academies because for any reason of lying, cheating, stealing, or tolerating. Only a midshipman can be dismissed for violating the disciplinary code and not the honor code too. That's a little bit matter of wording. Okay, now let's get back to toleration. Toleration of those among us who lie, cheat, and steal is a very difficult type thing to enforce. In other words, if you observe a fellow cadet or a fellow officer who is lying, cheating, and stealing, it is your duty, your sworn honor, to report that to others or else point it out to them and take action on this. You cannot ignore this. Like a police officer, cannot ignore a crime. He has to report this. It is duty to do this. In other words, in the military, this is called dereliction of duty. In civilian life, it's called misprision of office. That's a fancy way of saying, that you're derelict in your duty. But what it comes down to is you must whistleblow on other persons who are lying, cheating, stealing, or tolerating. This has been a big problem, especially amongst policemen. It's called the Blue Code of Silence, which I have published extensively on this one too, and the problems with whistleblowing and essentially why it doesn't work. Anyway, I've limited the study to, of course, the Air Force Academy, because that's where I'm more familiar with dealing with, because I was visiting scholar for honor at the Air Force Academy from 1999 until 2014, which time I left over several disagreements with them. But I probably devoted over 10,000 hours of volunteer time to the Air Force Academy for doing research on the honor system itself. Now, if you will take a look at this particular slide here, the cadets themselves knew that this toleration was not really being enforced. This is the cadet humor magazine called The Dodo, which, by the way, went out of existence about 2003 because it was considered politically incorrect. In other words, they had some investigation says that you know, with sexual harassment and other things, that cadets were tolerating rape and dishonesty. But the cadets themselves in this Dodo magazine, which was very much in existence till that time, said that about the zero toleration. It says, these are zero toleration glasses, said automatically darken in tight situations, prevent you from witnessing violations in the dorms, such as theft, improper uniform, and anything else you want to. So they knew that cadets, you know, amongst themselves were all tolerating violations of the honor code itself. Now, to do this study, I had originally back about 1984, 1985, started examining this in great detail, and what we did was actually interview and sent surveys out to graduates of the Air Force Academy and West Point and Annapolis, and asked them, in retrospect, when you were a cadet or a midshipman, did you actually violate the code? Did you lie, cheat, steal, or tolerate? And we got back some very sobering type answers. Now, the first thing is, if you want to interview Air Force Academy or West Point or Annapolis graduates, that it's not at all difficult to get them respond, because I found out with Academy graduates, their favorite topic is themselves, and they are never short of opinions on what they want to express. And we got a hold of these people by survey, something called the Register of Graduates. And about every 4 years, it used to be every year, every 4 years, roughly every academy publishes something called the Register of Graduates, and it is a sociologist's dream that you can actually find people who graduated 40, 50 years ago, and you can find their addresses, you can find their emails, and you can send them surveys and they respond. And every time we sent out these surveys, we got about a 35 to 40% response rate from graduates. Now, I don't know if you know anything about surveying techniques, but to get a 35 or 45% response rate, people actually sending back answers, is amazing. If you're like Procter & Gamble, you're sending out a survey, did you like our soap or didn't you? You're lucky if you get 1 or 2% response rate. I'm sure a lot of you have gotten your emails with surveys, and how many of you actually answered these things. But when it gets to the honor code, there's no cadet or midshipman that doesn't have one opinion. Now, this is the Air Force Academy Register of Graduates, 2014, it was last published. We get a hard copy, and you can send these surveys out. They're available to the public and do this. We have put this into what we call 4-year cohorts, because it's only generally published about every 4 years, and then every 4 years we update our database. And the database we have gotten up through 2014 now with the Air Force Academy, and the Naval Academy Register will be published hopefully sometime later this year in 2018. So we'll get these responses. So the response rate lags a little bit, maybe 4 years behind the actual graduation dates too. Now, how do you validate an honor code? Like, how do you validate a sex offender program? Well, one of the ways you can ask people whether they, actually believe in the honor code or not. Some of these techniques, such as the Air Force Academy uses, are called indirect or intentionality scales. And I know it gets a little deep in here on how you do that, but the intentionality scale is not whether you actually lied, cheated, or tolerated, but the typical way they do this is to take a cadet when they first comes into the academy, and you give him a survey, and these are, boilerplate type surveys, which are published, something called the Kohler Moral Development Scale, and there's one called the Defining Issues Test. What you actually do is present them with a moral dilemma, and ask them how they would deal with it. such as, and this would be a gross example, but if you were walking down the street and you saw a billionaire, okay, like Howard Hughes, drop a $5 bill, what would you do with it? Would you give it back to them? Would you notify the police and so forth? And then it gives you an equivalent type thing, a controlled condition. If you're walking down the street and you see a blind man, with a dog there, drop a $5 bill, would you give it back to him or would you take it and keep it for yourself? These are called intentionality scales because you ask persons, if you are faced with this moral type of dilemma, what would you do? Well, you find out in this business of psychology that people, what their intents are, not actually what they do. There's a big difference between your intent, to perform morally and what you actually do morally too. And actually with these intentionality scales like the Kohlers and the DIT are... what will I say? They're unclear because if you compare one test versus the other, as one of my colleagues, Hurley Hendrick and Christopher Ludke, who actually did this study, and he's still at the Academy, Christopher Ludke, did this study back in about 2002, found that there's very little agreement between these two different types of so-called moral scales on what would you do or what you not do. So we decided to cut to the chase and go actually ask them, did you, when you were a cadet or midshipman, did you actually lie, cheat, steal, or tolerate? And the answers are a whole lot different from what you get from these so-called intentionality scales. In fact, I've gotten quite tired of looking at some of these intentionality scales and how they do. Just as an aside, if you want an intentionality scale, which has gotten a great deal of publicity over the last, 15 or 20 years, is called the Trolley Dilemma. I don't know if you ever heard of this one, but you probably read about it, where you are watching a trolley come down the tracks there, and it's about to crash into, say, a crowd of 10 people down there, and you have the choice. You have control of this trolley switch, and you can switch that switch to where it'll either crash into the 10 or 15 people down there, or you can put it on another track where it's going to kill this fat man, sitting there. Would you kill one person or would you kill a dozen of them? Now it says instead of the switch, you would, if you had the choice of pushing the fat man onto the tracks to stop the trolley, a lot of people say, well, they wouldn't do that. Well, we know in the military, this is for a real-life case, that it's not unusual for a commander to send someone into the heat of battle there to sacrifice one person for the good of, say, a platoon that you want to save, too. But I don't think this has ever been shown for any real-life examples. So much for trolleyology, but if you want to, look up the Trolley Dilemma anytime on the internet, and be a lot of literature published on that. Okay, now how did we measure whether cadets or midshipmen? And we got a sample back right now about 2,700 of graduates from the classes of starting 1959 through 2014. At least for the Air Force Academy, we got roughly 1,000 samples back, divided into cohorts of what you call 4-year intervals, whether they actually lied, cheated, or steal. How we do this is called something called a Likert type scale, where you actually ask them to circle the number there, and it says, this is one of these. For validating the program, it says, as a cadet or midshipman, I knew of but did not report other cadets or midshipmen who were violating the honor code. And down here you say there's a scale 1, it says never, up until number 7, it says routinely, weekly, or daily. And it goes anywhere from 0 perhaps up to a maximum of 192 times that one self-admit to actually having violated the code. And you can get real life data out of this too. Okay, here's another one. This comes in the second half of the survey, and if you want a copy of the survey, just ask me anytime, and I have an email at the end of the presentation where you can ask for a copy of this survey. It's been put in several refereed publications that we have published, both Jim Warwicker and I and others over the years. So it's not at all difficult to get this. We've had very good results. This is one rating scales of where cadets or midshipmen placed the factors that they learned when they were at the academy. You can see in alphabetical order, it's the topics or factors that I learned at the academy, which was the most important to you. And you rate these from a 1 to 7 scale. Okay, it says academics, athletics, confidence, coping with pressure, honor is tucked in there, alphabetical order, loyalty, and all the others. And you can rate these, you know, a tie. You can give one a top rating, you give one a bottom rating, or you can rate them all at the top if you wish. And so these are very informative here, and they give you a load worth of data to come back on, okay, and results. Now, this is a previous study that we had published and presented here at the, I believe, the Psychonomic Society, which was about 2 years ago in Chicago. But you can see here from these scales that we got back out of these 24 to 2,700 responses in these graduates, which is about 1% of the entire population. You can see here that those who admitted having violated the honor code, you can see the red, there's the red, the green, and the blue there, that honor violations since 1959 through the year 2010 have been steadily increasing, admitted, that is, from admitting having violated the code at least once, from up to about 30% of the population up to about 60%. And guess who's leading the pack on admitted honor code violations? The Air Force Academy graduates. I don't know if there's anything to brag about, but take a look at these here. And those who tolerated other cadets and who are violating the honor code. You see here, the green here, the toleration has gone up here from about 20%, 1959 through 2010, to roughly about 60 or 65%. For some reason, always West Point seems to be the least violators, but still it's nothing to brag about. Okay, and this is the last one where you actually reported other cadets or midshipmen who were violating the honor code. And you can see this one is not increasing. This has remained pretty darn constant over the years. Very low rate from about anywhere from 10 to about 20% of cadets who actually reported other cadets or midshipmen who were violating the code, and that's remained very, very constant. So you can see there's a big difference between 65% who actually admitted violating the code versus those who were required to under their oath to report others. So at the best, I would say you're probably catching about 30% of those who actually violate the code. Okay, so much for past transgressions. Now, the actual study we did ourselves dealt with looking at cadets who actually had gone through this honor probation program, or the remediation or the rehabilitation program, and we had a very interesting data bank, because I actually went back to the records and found from the period of like 1990 or 1991 through 2002, we actually had a record of those cadets who had actually gone through this honor probation program. And there were like 370 over a 12-year period who'd gone through honor rehabilitation. And we got about a 35% response rate, or about a 25% response rate from those who came back. And we got 98 of these who were found guilty of violating the honor code and completed also the probation. Let me say, this probation that they go through is a rather lengthy process of about 6 months too. And completed probation successfully and went on to graduate. And even there, this 98 that we knew that had violated the honor code, and we had flagged their surveys so we know who they were ahead of time. 17 of these people out of the 98 denied in retrospect that they ever violated the code. What it sounds more like, they had completed a kind of a plea bargain. But they actually were vociferous and denied actually that they had violated the honor code. And all those years that I was a prison psychologist, this is very much inmate type behavior, where a guy says, they went ahead and, convicted me even though I didn't do it, but I went ahead and, went along with the program because I knew I'd get a lighter sentence or whatever. But 17% of them, 17 out of the 98 were in absolute denial that they ever violated the code, even though they went through the whole program. I guess what you can say is you can get people to say they've been rehabilitated, but whether they're rehabilitated is something else. Okay, now what happens with this toleration, this is the Sergeant Schultz type things with the blue code of silence. With toleration, you remember, if you ever watched Hogan Heroes, Sergeant Schultz says, "I know nothing, I see nothing, I hear nothing," like that. Well, this is apparently what happens, because the blue code of silence that, by the way, seems to have permeated the Air Force Academy honor code too, is that, if you didn't see it, it didn't happen. Well, okay. What this came down to with the data, we had done this, Jim Moriker and I had been dissertation advisors to a former faculty member, Meredith Ortiz, who wrote a dissertation on this. What it came down to, and the bottom line is that 60% of cadets and midshipmen personally do not regard toleration of other people lying, cheating, stealing, or tolerating as an honor code violation. In other words, they're making up their own rules as they go along. I'm reminded many years ago, I think I read in Time magazine about 1965 about Catholic women taking contraception, birth control. And the majority of Catholic women that were taking birth control pills said that they did not regard taking birth control pills, birth control measures as a sin. Okay, now I don't know if you're familiar that with this, but the Pope said, who makes the rules, that taking birth control or contraception is a sin. And they're saying, no, it isn't. I mean, who's gonna win on this argument too? But 60% of the cadets apparently had been rewriting their own rules and said in their own mind they did not regard toleration as a violation. Okay, now again, this comes from the Cadet Humor magazine, the Dodo. It says that their own definition of the honor code, it says, we will not lie, cheat, or steal, nor tolerate anyone who does. And then there's the big asterisk up on this, and it says, except, okay, in cases of, and you can list all sorts of reasons why you don't lie, cheat, steal, or tolerate. Okay, well, with the data we received, and this is well over 1,000 graduates at the Air Force Academy, we have stopped sending out postage surveys, and we've gone over to emails, and we get very strong responses there too. And by the way, if you want to find Academy graduates, who like to talk about themselves, I come up on the computer and the internet, and I found out that almost everybody, every graduating class from every academy has a Facebook page there. You get 1,000, possibly 1,000 persons that you could communicate with there if you wanted to. And with these surveys, it said we converted these admitted violations from never up to, say, 192 or more, converted to actual data. Zero times over a 4-year period, which, by the way, is tough not to lie about anything. If you want to see, if you want to get practical examples of who lies, well, just let me ask anybody, how much do you weigh? And you always get people that will lowball it, even though they know damn well if they're 220 pounds, they'll say, well, I'm only 200 pounds. So who lies? And I think we all do. It just matters, the intensity of the lie and how bad you think it is. And it goes up from 0 up to 192 times. Regularly, routinely, daily. And we found quite a few, I won't say quite a few, we found a significant minority of cadets who admitted to lying or not necessarily stealing or cheating, but lying maybe on a daily basis. Okay. Now, the actual study itself, what we did, we compared these probatees versus non-probatees. I did mention the probatees were these 98 individuals over like a 12-year period who actually had admitted to lying, cheating, stealing, or tolerated, and actually went through the lengthy 6-month probation program and graduated. And we compared this against non-probatees, and we had records on this, or I had records too from the surveys, of those who actually admitted lying, cheating, stealing, or tolerating, but were never caught, never found out, and went on to graduate anyway. I don't know if you could call this the scumbag population or not, but you got a nice comparison over this 12-year period when the honor code was, when this probation period was instituted, and by the time it finally got into full swing up about 2002. So you're comparing the non-probatees versus the probatees. And interestingly enough, if you're into statistics, this is analysis of variance, we found out that from this that if you go from the original 1991 up until 2002, when this probation program was actually put into full swing and up and going, that the slopes of the lines were actually significantly different. In other words, the admitted violations of the honor code kept going up and up, regardless of what time of remediation program they had. And even more interesting here, you found out that the cohort over the years, the slopes of the line keep going up. And for those of you who are interested in graphs, here, if you look at just plain old toleration, which is the red line versus the blue line, the toleration has finally outstripped actual admitted violations significantly too. And this is the cohort year of 1991 through 1994, when the program was finally instituted over a 4-year period, 1995 until 1998, and then when it was in full swing, it went up to 1999 through 2002. And the probation, both the actual admitted violations and admitted toleration have both tended to increase. Now, this is something I find very disturbing here on the last scale I showed you. If you recall those rankings of the factors that cadets and midshipmen learned as when they were back in cadets and midshipmen, which they thought were the most important things that they had learned while at the academy. I found, by the way, athletics was rather significantly lower than anything else. But if you find here, look at the blue line here, honor, okay. The top ranked items that they had learned at the academy starting in 1959, over 80% of them figure from 1955 until 1961, considered honor the most important thing they had learned. And that has declined over the years up until 2014 to about 40% of them figured that honor is the most important thing they had learned. More disturbingly, I found out that loyalty has the things they had learned, about 15% Air Force Academy graduates, and that has crept up to about 39%. Now, at present rates here, and if I predict into the future, within the next 4 years, loyalty is going to exceed and surpass honesty. And I find this disturbing because people who are public leaders and politicians who stress loyalty over honesty, I think it does not say much for the types of people that we are developing in our country to be leaders too. I find politically, this is very much in the news to this day, from our top of the leadership on down, that they are stressing the loyalty. This is almost like, I think you can make a good parallel between that of organized crime, which is more important, honesty or loyalty. And being loyal to the boss more important than coming out clean and honest, I find frightening. Okay. Now, the last one I want to go into is how many different types of remediation has the Air Force Academy tried over the last, 50 years or 60 years, okay? Now, the generals will say that, well, we had, we figured out that way back in roughly 1960, that maybe if a cadet violated the honor code that he was dismissed from the academy. It was a little too rough. So what they gave was something called a discretion program. Back in 1955 through 1961, if you were found guilty of an honor violation, and one of these famous persons at West Point, that was guilty of an honor violation was our old spiritual guru of years ago, who was a West Point cadet back then, Timothy Leary, the LSD king. He had been found guilty of an honor violation and refused to resign, so he was placed on the silence program for about 2 years until he finally did resign on his own. So that's kind of rough. I mean, you tell one white lie, you could have been booted out. So up until 1961, you were automatically dismissed. In other words, the Commandant said, we give you anywhere from 24 to 48 hours so the guy is gone from the institution. And it was pretty well enforced. So the honor board and the cadets said, well, maybe that's a little bit too rough on people, so we'll give them discretion. Now, discretion means what it was back then, 1961, that if especially only a fourth classman who was found guilty of an honor board violation of something, I guess an insignificant offense, like, Mr., did you shine your shoes today or did you not? And he lies about that. Well, maybe that's a little more serious than, actually stolen, something from the Bank of England. So they figured that was a little more a little more tolerant. And there were only, like, over the first year, only 2 fourth-classmen who were ever given this discretion. There were no penalties involved in this, but they said, watch your step here from now on. Now, that was the discretion program. I know that the commandants and the hierarchy has said that, that discretion was introduced. Yes, it was, but it was only meant to be used in exceptional cases, and very, very gingerly at that time. And I remember when I first got back to teach at the Air Force Academy in 1971, they had it was a hockey team scandal, as I recall, that the hockey team was passing back information on tests like this. And the hockey team being involved in this, they didn't know what to do with these, so they actually sent these 15 or 16 violators up in front of a mental health over at the hospital to see whether, I guess, they were psychopaths or whether they're crazy or stupid. I went up there and reviewed these records. It's almost hilarious where they figured, well, if a person lies, cheated, or steals, we're going to send them to a psychiatrist, see if there's something wrong with them. But they tried that for about a year, and I looked at these records, and they couldn't say anything except, they sent them right back to the commandant saying, no, these guys are just jerks. They are not crazy or stupid anyway, or they're even what you call personality disorders. Personality disorder is something you call like a person who's a pain in the neck more than crazy or stupid. They went to back in 1973 dealings with the honor boards of the of the legal model, where this back at West Point in Annapolis, it turned out that cadets were being dismissed from the academy without receiving their legal rights, due process of law. And this, I think, went all the way up to the Supreme Court, or else up to the New York Circuit Court, where they said, and this was a ruling from the judges, said a cadet will not be, like the First Amendment, you will not be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. So at that time, they had the legal model, which almost, every time an honor board hearing is convened, that a cadet has his legal rights or her legal rights very much respected. And I've had several graduates that have attended these honor board hearings, and they say they couldn't tell the difference between an honor board hearing and a court-martial. And it was meant that way, the court-martial and honor boards are very much parallel. They look like each other so as not to violate their rights. And there were a whole bunch of cadets and midshipmen who were kept at the academy because of this legal model. Back about 1976, when they were decided they kept the legal model, but they had suspension. And this is a really strange one here, where if you were found guilty by an honor board of having violated, the honor board of your peers, obviously other cadets who hear your case, first of all, you are given a lawyer. Okay, a lawyer is assigned to every person who's accused of an honor board violation. And what they did in 1976 was suspension. In other words, you found guilty of an honor code violation, and at that point, you would be suspended from the academy. And there was a big scandal that came out about that time. Suspended, what it meant, you were kicked out of the academy. In other words, you were kicked out of the academy, and you could reapply to come in with the class the next year. This is not unheard of, because Harvard had had this for years, called rustication program. What it really meant is where you were kicked out of Harvard and you were rusticated. In other words, that's a way of saying you were sent to the country so you could think over and ruminate on your sins against the Air Force, and then you could reapply to come back in. And they would have, my goodness, I think there were 20 to 40 cadets per year that were rusticated, sent back, reapplied, and then they came back to the academy and managed to graduate too. Famous people who were rusticated from Harvard, one of them was William Randolph Hearst, the famous Hearst Castle man, publisher of the, most of the Herald papers in San Francisco and Los Angeles. Another rusticated, Senator Teddy Kennedy, who was found guilty of cribbing or cheating at Harvard, was sent into rustication for about a year, served a 2-year hitch in the Army, then came back, obviously got reelected to the Senate. In 1984, I talked to General Scott Winfield Scott, who was the superintendent at the time, had a long interview with him, and he said he didn't think much of that rustication program because cadets like to treat that more like a sabbatical, where they got a breather for about a year and were able to come back too. So they went to a military justice program, and there was a big scandal came out about that time in 1984, whether the superintendent actually suspended the honor code for about a year and a half and went to a UCMJ, that's called Uniform Code of Military Justice Board, where a cadet suspected of violating the honor code was heard before a board of officers. And in a few cases, they actually got a few court-martial convictions, went through Article 15, which is a non-judicial military punishment too, and they kept that one up for about 2 years. In other words, with this military justice, you know, if you were found guilty, if you did not get court-martialed, you got a whole slug of punishment tours that kept you busy for about 6 months too, until you marched those off, and that was the full scale of the punishment too, just marching tours around. Finally, they went to the disciplinary model. Actually, this is part of the tours, the disciplinary. But in 1992, they introduced what we're talking about here is the rehabilitation program. Okay, how do you rehabilitate sex offenders? How do you rehabilitate alcoholics? How do you rehabilitate honor code offenders? And the answer is, I don't have the answer, and nor does anybody else. Well, the honor rehabilitation program is pretty involved. It begins with a cadet who is found guilty of an honor violation is immediately reduced in rank. He or she loses all privileges, is restricted to the academy for about a 6-month period, and has to keep a journal of his daily thoughts on how he is doing to rehabilitate himself. He is assigned a mentor, usually an officer or a civilian graduate from the academy, who constantly monitors and gives him advice on how to behave honorably. And the big thing is he has to make a formal paper or presentation running perhaps anywhere from 20 to numeral 40 pages. And in the end, he has to present this paper to his peers or his classmates. At the end of this period, if he is found to have met all the qualifications for rehabilitation, it is referred to the Commandant, and at that point, the cadet is restored to the cadet wing in good standing. In 1999, when I first got there, I actually called a sergeant and a major who devised this program, and I said, how did you come up with this rehabilitation program? And they said, well, we were given instructions by the Commandant to do something. So over a weekend, I guess over a case of Coca-Cola and potato chips, we drew up this program, rehabilitation, and the Commandant bought it. And furthermore, not only did the Air Force Academy buy it, but actually West Point and Annapolis also adopted the same kind of program. I say completely unvalidated, but they said it sounded good, so we did it. This is the graph, and I want you to take a closer look at this. I took a lot of colors here to put there, but this goes through the different rehabilitation programs or remediation programs that the Air Force Academy has gone through over the last 60-some years. And when they say the Air Force Academy Honor Code has remained intact, well, I did some research back in this, roughly about 2005 or 6, and it turned out that, going through these minor and major changes they've had to the honor system and the code, I counted like 115 different amendments that have been placed on the honor remediation programs too. And this goes back with the green. You can see this is the dismissal program. The discretion lasted for about 5 or 6 years, and it's like the camel getting his nose under the tent. They went from 2 dualies that were in the discretion program up to the case presently where almost everybody who violates the honor code is given a second chance, almost everybody. And right here, there's the mental health model, lasted for about a year. There's the legal transition where cadets are given their rights under the Constitution. The legal transition, and then you go into suspension. This was the one that General Scott didn't think much of, where they got rusticated up through the disciplinary and finally the program of rehabilitation. Okay. Now, I don't know if you can rehabilitate people. I'm just a messenger. I'm not recommending how to do this. But you can see that the violations of the code, even under the rehabilitation program, have been going up and up and up to about roughly about 70% of those were violations, actual violations of the code, and admitting toleration of others has remained pretty much constant over the years too. And again, I say it kind of frightens me to think that eventually, the values they place on this, where honesty will be surpassed by loyalty, is kind of frightening. You can see that it's kind of leveled off here. What I want to say here is that what we conclude from the data is the good news is that admitted honor violations and toleration seem to have leveled out. You can see back here. That's pretty much a leveled graph there. They seem to level out. And the bad news is that honor violations and tolerations remain at all-time highs. And all I can conclude from the data right now, the case for effective honor probation with the rehabilitation is simply not proven. This is the Scottish verdict, not proven. So I would trust that the multi-million-dollar operation that they have with a brand new $40 million building, plus I would estimate perhaps between a $2 and $5 million budget that they have up there, they're going to continue to do some kind of research on this, actual research on actual violations of the honor code, whether it is worth enforcing, whether it actually works or not. And again, my name is Fredrick Malmstrom. I'm a 64 graduate here, and if you want to have any questions or anything you want to address me on an email, this is my email here. It's fvmalmstrom@gmail.com. I'm always available for, like any Academy graduate, I'm not afraid to express my opinion. Okay, thank you very much.